The night sky over the Balkans was deceptively peaceful when Captain Jake Mitchell's FA-18 Super Hornet screamed through the darkness at 450 knots. His heads-up display painted the world in eerie green phosphorescence, showing terrain, altitude, and threat warnings that had been mercifully silent for the past 40 minutes. This was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance run, photograph enemy position, return to the carrier, hot shower, and stale coffee. Simple, clean, safe. Viper 2-1, this is Overwatch. We're picking up increased radio chatter in your sector. Recommend you expedite your run and RTB. The AWACS controller's voice crackled through his helmet. Jake's gloved hand tightened on the stick. Something felt wrong. In his 8 years of flying combat missions, he'd learned to trust that feeling, that electric tingle at the base of his skull that screamed danger before his conscious mind could process why. Copy, Overwatch. Beginning final pass now. He banked the Super Hornet hard, feeling the G-forces press him into his seat as the targeting pod swiveled to capture images of the enemy compound nestled in the valley below. The photographs would show troop movements, artillery positions, supply routes, intelligence that could save American lives. 3 more seconds. 2 more seconds. Almost done. Then the night exploded. The missile warning system shrieked like a banshee, and Jake's training took over instantly. Chaff and flares erupted from his aircraft in a desperate cloud of countermeasures, creating a constellation of false targets. He threw the Super Hornet into a violent diving turn, yanking the stick so hard his vision grayed at the edges. But the SA-15 surface-to-air missile was too close, too fast, guided by radar that had locked onto him with deadly precision. The impact felt like God's fist punching through the aircraft. Metal screamed as the warhead detonated just behind the cockpit, shredding hydraulics, fuel lines, and flight controls in a cascade of catastrophic failure. Warning lights blazed red across every panel. The stick went dead in Jake's hands. His beautiful, powerful fighter jet had just become a 20-ton coffin falling from the sky. Mayday, Viper 2-1 is hit. I'm punching out. Jake's hand found the ejection handle between his legs. The canopy exploded away into the night. The rocket motor under his seat ignited with a violence that felt like his spine was being compressed by a giant's thumb. Then he was airborne, tumbling through freezing darkness as his aircraft tumbled away below him, trailing fire like a dying meteor before exploding against a mountainside in an orange-white fireball that briefly turned night into day. The parachute deployed with a crack that jerked him upright, and suddenly the world was silent except for the whistle of wind through the suspension lines. Jake looked down at the hostile mountains rushing up to meet him. His radio was dead. His emergency beacon was transmitting, but he was 15 miles behind enemy lines. Even if the rescue helicopter launched immediately, they'd need hours to reach him, hours he didn't have. The ground came up fast. Jake tucked and rolled, executing the landing exactly as trained, but the rocky terrain punished him anyway. Pain exploded through his ribs as he slammed into jagged stones. He lay there for precious seconds, gasping, tasting blood, listening. Voices, distant but growing closer. Searchlights began sweeping the mountainside. Jake forced himself up, ignoring the agony in his side, and started running. He'd done the survival training, memorized the escape and evasion protocols. Find water, avoid trails, move at night, signal for rescue. The words ran through his mind like a mantra as he crashed through pine forests and scrambled over loose scree that threatened to betray his position with every sliding stone. For 36 hours, Jake Mitchell became a ghost. He moved through ravines and game trails, drinking from icy streams, hiding in hollow logs and beneath rock overhangs when search parties passed too close. He bound his ribs with strips torn from his flight suit. He ate wild berries that made him sick but kept him alive. He watched enemy patrols from concealment, memorizing their patterns, waiting for the rescue that he prayed was coming. But exhaustion is a patient enemy. On the second night, as Jake climbed through a narrow gorge, his boot slipped on wet stone. He tumbled down 15 feet of rock face, his head cracking against granite. Stars exploded behind his eyes. He tried to rise, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. The voices returned, closer now, shouting in a language he didn't understand but whose meaning was clear. They'd found him. Rough hands grabbed his arms, yanking him to his feet. A rifle butt slammed into his stomach, doubling him over. Jake fought, landing one good punch that broke someone's nose before 3 men tackled him into the mud. They zip-tied his hands behind his back with brutal efficiency, shouting questions he couldn't answer. A boot connected with his ribs, the same ribs he'd cracked in the landing, and Jake couldn't suppress the scream. 3 kilometers away, on a windswept ridge overlooking the valley, Staff Sergeant Riley Cross had been watching through her rifle scope for the past 6 hours. Her Marine Scout sniper team had been conducting reconnaissance on enemy positions when they'd witnessed the aircraft go down. She tracked the pilot's evasion attempt with growing respect and dread, knowing that eventually the numbers would catch up to him. Now, through her scope's powerful magnification, Riley watched 4 enemy soldiers drag the American pilot from the forest into a clearing. Even at this distance, she could see blood on his face, the way he struggled against his captors. Her finger rested on the trigger of her M40A5 sniper rifle. The crosshairs settled on the head of the man holding the pilot. 800 meters. Light wind. She could make the shot. She could drop all 4 guards before they knew what hit them. "Cross, what's your status?" Her team leader's voice was calm in her earpiece. Riley's jaw clenched. She knew the answer before she spoke it. "I have eyes on the pilot. He's captured 4 enemy combatants." She paused, watching them drag Jake toward a waiting truck. "Request permission to engage." "Negative, we're reconnaissance only. Our position would be compromised. Battalion is spinning up a rescue operation. We need you to track and report." Riley watched through her scope as they threw Captain Mitchell into the back of the truck. He looked up once, toward the mountains, as if he could feel her eyes on him. Then a soldier slammed the tailgate shut, and the truck roared away down the dirt road, disappearing into the darkness. Riley lifted her eye from the scope, her jaw tight with frustration. She just watched an American pilot get captured, and she'd been powerless to stop it. But as she settled back into her hide position and keyed her radio to report the truck's direction, a cold determination settled over her. This wasn't over. That pilot, Captain Jake Mitchell, according to the mission brief she'd received, was 15 miles behind enemy lines, hurt and alone, but he wasn't abandoned. Riley had seen his face through her scope. She'd watched him fight, and somehow, someway, she was going to bring him home. The hunt had just begun. The operations tent was thick with tension, and the smell of strong coffee when Staff Sergeant Riley Cross and her sniper team filed in 18 hours after witnessing Captain Mitchell's capture. Riley's uniform was still caked with mountain dust, her face lined with exhaustion, but her eyes were sharp and focused. She'd spent the night tracking the enemy convoy's movements, radioing coordinates, watching the compound where they'd taken the pilot. Sleep could wait. Mitchell couldn't. "Take your seats." Commander Paul Hendricks stood before a large digital display showing satellite imagery of a fortified compound nestled in a valley surrounded by hostile territory. His weathered face bore the expression of a man delivering news he wished he didn't have to share. "What I'm about to brief you on is classified top secret. Nothing leaves this tent." Riley leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly on the table. Beside her sat her spotter, Corporal Danny Torres, a kid from Houston with eyes like a hawk and hands steady as stone. To her right, Sergeant Mike Chen, their team leader, a veteran of 3 combat deployments who could read terrain like poetry, and Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, their communications specialist, whose calm voice had guided them through more firefights than Riley cared to count. Hendricks clicked a remote, and Mitchell's service photo appeared on screen. Captain Jake Mitchell, call sign Viper 21, 8-year veteran, over 200 combat missions, one of our best pilots, shot down 43 hours ago during a reconnaissance operation. The image shifted to thermal footage showing the crash site. Captain Mitchell evaded capture for 36 hours before being taken by enemy forces approximately 22 miles behind the line of control. "Where is he now, sir?" Riley's voice cut through the briefing with military precision, though inside her chest, her heart hammered with urgency. Hendricks changed the image to show the compound Riley had been observing. Here, a former Soviet-era military installation that's been retrofitted as a detention and interrogation facility. We've confirmed Mitchell is being held in the central structure. He zoomed in on a rectangular building with reinforced walls and few windows. The problem is what he's carrying. A new image appeared, mission codes, encryption keys, targeting data. Riley felt her stomach tighten. Captain Mitchell was carrying classified authentication codes for our theater-wide communications network, Hendricks continued, his voice grave. If those codes are extracted, the enemy gains the ability to intercept, decrypt, or even spoof our military communications across the entire region. They could order false airstrikes, redirect supply convoys, compromise every operation we're running. We're talking about potential casualties in the thousands. Jesus, Torres muttered beside Riley. How long until he breaks? Chen asked, though everyone in the tent knew the answer would be optimistic at best. Captain Mitchell is seer-trained. Survival, evasion, resistance, escape. He'll hold out as long as humanly possible, but these aren't conventional interrogators. Hendricks pulled up surveillance photos of men in dark uniforms entering the compound. Intelligence identifies these individuals as specialists brought in specifically for high-value extractions. They have pharmaceutical methods, psychological techniques, and less civilized approaches. Riley's jaw clenched. She'd seen what less civilized meant in previous deployments. The images never left you. Current assessment gives us 72 hours before Mitchell either breaks or is transferred to a black site facility in the capital where recovery becomes effectively impossible. Hendricks let that sink in before continuing. We're mounting a rescue operation. Alpha Company will conduct the primary assault with helicopter insertion. Your team, Cross, will provide overwatch and precision fire support. The display shifted to a topographical map showing approach routes, defensive positions, and sight lines. Riley studied it with the intensity of a chess master analyzing a board. Her mind was already calculating distances, angles, wind patterns, escape routes. The compound has approximately 50 enemy combatants at any given time, Hendricks continued. 2 guard towers with mounted machine guns, roving patrols, vehicle checkpoints, and likely IEDs along the approach roads. The assault team will breach the western perimeter here. He indicated a point on the map, while a blocking force secures the northern exit to prevent reinforcements. Your sniper team will position on this ridgeline. His laser pointer highlighted a position Riley recognized immediately from her surveillance, providing overwatch and eliminating high-value targets on my command. What's the extraction plan, sir? Webb asked, his tactical mind already working through the logistics. 2 Black Hawks will insert the assault team and extract with the package. Flight time to the compound is 12 minutes. We estimate 7 minutes on the ground for the actual rescue. Any longer and we risk significant casualties from enemy reinforcements. Hendricks paused. This is high risk, people. The enemy knows we're coming. They've tripled security since the shootdown. They want us to try this. Riley stared at Mitchell's photo on the screen. Square jaw covered in several days of beard growth. Intelligent eyes that seemed to look right through the camera. She wondered what he was thinking right now, locked in that cell, knowing his own people might be planning to bomb the compound if extraction proved impossible. Knowing he carried secrets that could cost thousands of lives. Staff Sergeant Cross, Hendricks addressed her directly. You've had eyes on this compound for 18 hours. What's your assessment? Riley stood, moving to the map. Her finger traced the sight lines from the ridgeline to the compound. The position is solid, sir. 800 meters to the central building, good elevation, multiple fallback positions if we're compromised. But there's a problem. She zoomed in on the compound's layout. These buildings create dead zones, areas where we won't have visual coverage during the assault, and if they move Mitchell during the operation, we could lose track of him entirely. "Can you do the job?" Hendricks asked bluntly. Riley looked at Mitchell's photo again. She thought about the moment she'd watched him get captured, helpless to intervene. She thought about the 72-hour clock that was already ticking down. She thought about the weight of a human life measured against the pressure of a trigger pull. "Yes, sir, we can do it." "Good." Hendricks pulled up a mission timeline. "You insert at 200 hours. That gives you 4 hours to reach your position and establish overwatch before dawn. The assault launches at 6:30. You'll have one shot at this, people. Mitchell's life depends on perfect execution." As the briefing continued with details about radio frequencies, rules of engagement, and contingency plans, Riley found herself studying every pixel of that satellite image. She memorized guard positions, patrol routes, the exact dimensions of every building. In 36 hours, she would be looking at that compound through her rifle scope, and every detail could mean the difference between bringing Captain Mitchell home in a helicopter or a body bag. After the briefing, as the team prepared their gear, Torres approached Riley at the equipment cage. "You think we can really pull this off? 50 hostiles, fortified position, broad daylight." Riley checked the action on her M40A5, the rifle she'd carried through 2 deployments and more missions than she could count. The weapon was an extension of her will, perfectly zeroed, perfectly maintained. She looked at her young spotter and saw the doubt in his eyes. "That pilot trusted his country to bring him home, Danny. He trusted us." Riley loaded a magazine, the familiar weight settling into her hands. "We're not going to let him down. We're going to get him out, or we're going to die trying." Torres nodded slowly, and Riley saw the doubt transform into determination. In a cell 15 miles away, Captain Jake Mitchell sat in darkness, his body aching, his mind focused on a single thought: hold on. Hold on just a little longer. They're coming. They have to be coming. He was right. Riley Cross was coming, and she was bringing hell with her. The night was moonless when the Black Hawk helicopter skimmed over the mountain peaks at barely 50 feet, flying nap of the earth to avoid enemy radar. Inside the cargo bay, Riley Cross sat with her rifle between her knees, eyes closed, running through the mission parameters one final time in her mind. 800 meters. Elevation advantage of 200 feet. Wind typically flows east to west through the valley at 5 to 8 knots. Compound has 50 enemy combatants, 2 guard towers, roving patrols every 20 minutes. 2 minutes, the crew chief shouted over the rotor noise. Riley opened her eyes and looked at her team. Torres was checking his spotting scope for the 3rd time, his nervous energy barely contained. Chen sat motionless, a statue of calm focus. Webb was testing his radio equipment, ensuring they'd maintain communication with command. These 3 men had become her brothers through shared danger and absolute trust. The helicopter flared, hovering 10 feet above a rocky clearing. "Go, go, go!" Riley and her team fast-stroked down into hostile territory, their boots hitting the ground in near silence despite the 70 pounds of gear each carried. The Black Hawk disappeared into the darkness before the sound of its rotors had even faded, leaving them alone 15 miles behind enemy lines. "Move out," Chen whispered, and they began their infiltration. The route to their observation point was 5 miles of treacherous mountain terrain, steep ridges, loose scree that could betray their position with a single misplaced step, and enemy patrols that owned this ground. Riley moved like a ghost, placing each footstep with deliberate care, using natural cover, reading the terrain with the instinct of a predator. Her ghillie suit, a painstakingly crafted garment of burlap strips, netting, and natural vegetation, broke up her human silhouette, making her nearly invisible even at close range. They moved in a tactical column, each man covering a different sector, communication reduced to hand signals. An hour into the infiltration, Chen's fist shot up freeze. Riley melted into the shadows of a boulder, her breathing shallow and controlled. Through the darkness, she heard voices. Enemy patrol. Two men, maybe three, walking a trail 30 meters below their position. For 5 eternal minutes, Riley didn't move a muscle. A mosquito landed on her neck and bit her. She didn't flinch. The enemy soldiers passed directly below, close enough that she could hear one of them complaining about the cold. Their flashlights swept the terrain, but the team's positioning and camouflage made them invisible. When the voices finally faded into the distance, Chen gave the signal to continue. 3 hours after insertion, they reached their objective, a rocky outcropping on a ridgeline that overlooked the valley and the compound where Captain Mitchell was being held. Riley immediately began setting up her hide site, a position so carefully constructed that an enemy soldier could walk within 10 feet and never know she was there. Using natural materials, rocks, branches, brush, she created a low-profile observation post that blended seamlessly with the surrounding terrain. Her rifle was positioned on a small bipod, aimed at the compound below. Torres set up beside her with his spotting scope, a high-powered optic that would allow him to identify targets and call corrections. Behind them, Webb established their communications gear, and Chen secured their perimeter. "Overwatch 1 to command, we are in position," Webb whispered into his encrypted radio. "Copy Overwatch 1, begin surveillance. Assault team launches in 4 hours." Riley pressed her eye to her rifle scope, and the compound leapt into sharp focus even in the pre-dawn darkness. The 25x magnification of her optic transformed the distance, making the 800 meters feel intimate, immediate. She could see individual guards on the walls, count the sandbags at the checkpoints, observe the steam rising from someone's coffee mug. As dawn broke, painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber, Riley began her methodical observation. She noted everything in a small waterproof notebook: guard rotations, defensive positions, vehicle movements, communication patterns. Torres called out distances to key structures, wind speed and direction, atmospheric conditions that would affect bullet trajectory. "Guard Tower 1, 2 sentries rotating every 2 hours, Riley murmured. "Machine gun nest looks like a PKM. Sandbag position reinforced. Tower 2, same configuration. Main gate, 4 guards visible, 2 more in the checkpoint booth." "I count 16 buildings inside the perimeter," Torres added, his eye glued to the spotting scope. "Central structure, that's where they're holding him. 3 stories, reinforced concrete, bars on the windows." Hour after hour, Riley watched. The sun climbed higher, bringing heat that made the air shimmer and complicated her calculations. Enemy soldiers moved through the compound on their routines, shift changes, meal times, patrol rotations. She memorized faces, recognized who was in charge by the way others deferred to them, identified the most dangerous shooters by how they carried their weapons. 14 hours into their observation, Riley saw him. The door to the central building opened, and 2 guards emerged dragging a man between them. Even at 800 meters, even through the scope, Riley recognized Captain Jake Mitchell from his service photo. But the man she was looking at now bore the brutal marks of captivity. His flight suit was torn and blood-stained. His face was swollen, one eye nearly closed. His hands were bound behind his back, and he moved with the stiffness of someone in significant pain. "I've got eyes on the package," Riley said quietly, her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest. "He's ambulatory but injured. They're moving him to the secondary building, northeast corner." Through her scope, Riley watched as the guards shoved Mitchell across the compound yard. He stumbled, went down on one knee. A guard kicked him in the ribs, and even though Riley couldn't hear it from this distance, she could see Mitchell's mouth open in a cry of pain. Her finger twitched near the trigger guard. "Not yet. Not yet." Mitchell struggled back to his feet, and as he did, something extraordinary happened. He looked up, directly toward the mountains, toward the ridgeline where Riley lay hidden. It was impossible that he could see her. She was invisible, concealed, 800 meters away. But for just a moment his gaze seemed to lock onto her position, and Riley could have sworn she saw determination in his eyes even through the scope. "Stay strong," she whispered, though he couldn't possibly hear. "I'm coming for you." They threw Mitchell into the secondary building and slammed the door. Riley marked the location on her map, measuring the exact distance, 847 meters, noting the sight lines, the obstacles, the angles. If things went wrong during the assault, if she needed to take a shot to protect him, she needed to know every variable. "What do you think?" Torres asked quietly, reading the tension in her posture. "I think they've been working him over pretty good," Riley replied, her jaw tight. "But he's tough. He's holding on." As afternoon faded toward evening, Riley documented 3 more sightings of Mitchell being moved between buildings. Each time, she studied him through her scope, looking for signs of how badly he was hurt, whether he could move quickly if needed, whether he'd be able to run during an extraction. Each time, she saw a man who was beaten but not broken, hurt but not defeated. On his 4th movement, one of Mitchell's guards got careless, stepping away to light a cigarette. Mitchell seized the moment, suddenly lunging forward and headbutting another guard in the face. The man went down hard, blood streaming from his broken nose. It was a futile gesture. 3 other guards tackled Mitchell within seconds, but Riley found herself smiling grimly. The pilot had fight left in him. Good. He'd need it. That night, as darkness fell over the compound, Riley and her team maintained their vigil. They ate cold rations, drank water sparingly, and never left their positions. Sleep was taken in 2-hour shifts, with at least 2 sets of eyes always on the compound. During her watch, Riley stared through her scope at the building where Mitchell was being held. A single light burned in one window. She wondered if he was awake, if he was in pain, if he knew that just 800 meters away, an American sniper was watching over him like a guardian angel he couldn't see. "Tomorrow," Riley whispered to herself, "tomorrow we bring you home." But tomorrow would bring complications neither Riley nor Mitchell could have anticipated, complications that would transform a difficult mission into a near-impossible one, and would ultimately lead to the shot that would define both their lives. For now, Riley watched and waited, her rifle ready, her resolve absolute. Captain Jake Mitchell wasn't just a mission objective anymore. He was a fellow warrior in enemy hands, and Riley Cross had never failed to protect her own. The countdown to the assault had begun. 22 hours remained. In the darkness, Riley's finger rested near her trigger, patient and ready. When the moment came, she would not miss. She never did. Riley was cataloging her 16th observation of the guard rotation when Webb's urgent whisper shattered the pre-dawn stillness. "Overwatch 1, I'm picking up priority traffic from command. Stand by." She kept her eye pressed to her scope, watching the compound come alive with the first hints of morning activity. Guards were changing shifts, moving with the sluggish motions of men who'd been awake all night. Everything was proceeding according to the patterns she'd documented over the past 24 hours. "Cross, we've got a problem," Webb said, his voice tight with tension. "Command is on the line. They need to speak with you directly." Riley's stomach tightened. Nothing good ever came from command wanting to talk directly to a field operator. She rolled away from her rifle and took the handset. "Overwatch 1 actual, go ahead." Commander Hendrick's voice crackled through, stripped of its usual composure. "Cross, we've intercepted enemy communications. Mitchell's transfer has been accelerated. They're moving him today, 18 hours ahead of schedule." "Say again, sir." Riley felt her carefully constructed mission timeline crumbling. "We're not ready. The assault team isn't even wheels up yet." "They're spinning up now. We're moving the entire operation forward. New H-hour is 1400 local time. That's—" Hendricks paused and Riley could hear him calculating. 6 hours and 40 minutes from now. Riley looked at Torres, whose face had gone pale in the dim morning light. 6 hours. They'd planned for a dawn assault after full preparation. Now they'd be hitting in broad daylight with half the prep time. "Sir, we need more time too." "There is no more time, Staff Sergeant." Hendrick's voice carried the weight of impossible choices. Intelligence indicates Mitchell broke down during interrogation last night. They got something out of him, we don't know what, but it's accelerated their timetable. If we don't extract him today, he disappears into a black site facility by tonight. After that, he's gone forever. Riley's jaw clenched. Mitchell had broken. She'd watched him through her scope, seen his strength, his resistance. The man had held out for nearly 60 hours under conditions that would destroy most people. No shame in that. But now the clock had run out. "Understood, sir. We'll be ready." "There's more." Hendrick's pause was ominous. "You need to look at the compound now." Riley swung back to her rifle, pressing her eye to the scope. What she saw made her blood run cold. The compound had transformed overnight. Where there had been perhaps 50 enemy combatants yesterday, there were now at least 150. Troops were everywhere, on the walls, in the towers, patrolling the perimeter in squads of 6 instead of pairs. Technical vehicles, pickup trucks mounted with heavy machine guns, had been positioned at strategic points around the compound. And in the center of it all, 3 attack helicopters sat on a makeshift landing pad, their rotors already beginning to turn. "Jesus Christ," Tor's breath beside her, seeing the same thing through his spotting scope. "They know we're coming," Chen said flatly from his position behind them. "This is a trap." Riley's mind raced, recalculating every variable, every plan. The assault team would be flying into a hornet's nest. The helicopters could engage them in midair. The increased ground forces would overwhelm them in seconds. This wasn't just difficult anymore, it was potentially suicidal. "Sir," Riley keyed the radio, "I'm looking at triple the enemy force we briefed. They've got attack helicopters, heavy weapons, hardened defensive positions. If we launch this assault, we're going to take significant casualties. We need to abort and replan." The silence on the other end stretched for an eternity. Riley could imagine Hendricks in the operations center, staring at the same satellite imagery she was seeing, weighing the life of one pilot against the lives of the 40 men who would launch into that kill zone. "Stand by, Overwatch 1." Riley watched through her scope as enemy soldiers moved with purpose through the compound. They were preparing for battle. Ammunition was being distributed. Fighting positions were being reinforced. The attack helicopters were being armed with rocket pods. These weren't garrison troops going through the motions. These were combat veterans preparing to kill Americans. "Look at the central building," Tor said urgently. "Northeast corner, second-floor window." Riley shifted her aim and her breath caught. Captain Mitchell stood at a barred window, 2 guards flanking him. Even at 800 meters, she could see fresh bruises on his face, blood on his shirt. But what struck her was his posture. He stood straight despite obvious pain, looking out at the mountains as if searching for something. Searching for hope. Searching for rescue. "Overwatch 1, this is command." Hendrick's voice returned, heavy with the weight of command decisions. "Higher authority is recommending we abort the rescue operation. The risk is too high. We're looking at alternative options." Alternative options. Riley knew what that meant. Precision airstrike. Turn the entire compound into a crater, killing Mitchell along with the enemy and the intelligence he carried. Clean. Final. No risk to American forces except one pilot who was already as good as dead. "No," the word came out before Riley could stop it. "Excuse me, Staff Sergeant." Riley's mind was working at light speed, analyzing angles, distances, timing. Through her scope, she watched the compound's activity, noting patterns even in the chaos. The attack helicopters were being fueled, a 30-minute process. The new troops were still getting oriented, still learning the layout. And there, in that window, Captain Mitchell was being moved again, this time toward the landing pad. "Sir, request permission to speak freely." "Granted." "We can still do this." Riley's voice carried absolute conviction. "The enemy is expecting an aerial assault. That's why they have the helicopters positioned for air defense. But they're making a mistake. They're concentrating their forces around the landing pad, creating a staging area for Mitchell's transfer. That's going to be our window. What window? Hendricks sounded skeptical. Cross, I'm looking at the same imagery you are. This is suicide. No, sir, it's opportunity. Riley's finger traced movement through her scope. They're going to move Mitchell from that building to the transport helicopter. That movement will happen on foot, across open ground. Based on their current prep work, I estimate they'll move him in approximately 90 seconds from the building to the helicopter. During that movement, their defensive focus will be on external threats, not internal security. You want to hit them during the transfer. Exactly, sir. My team can provide precision fire to neutralize key targets, the helicopter pilots, the heavy weapons operators, the officers coordinating the defense. We eliminate their command and control in the first 10 seconds. The assault team hits them while they're in chaos, extracts Mitchell during the confusion, and we're out before they can organize a response. Torres was staring at her like she'd lost her mind. Chen's expression was unreadable. Webb had stopped breathing. The margin for error is 0, Hendricks said slowly. Yes, sir, but it's a margin that exists. If we abort now, Mitchell dies. If we strike with precision during that 90-second window, we bring him home. Riley paused, watching the pilot through her scope. Sir, I can make these shots. My team can execute this. We just need the assault force to trust us and hit them at exactly the right moment. Another long silence. Riley could hear radio chatter in the background at the command center, voices arguing, debating, calculating odds and risks. If this goes wrong, Cross, a lot of good men will die. If we don't try, sir, Captain Mitchell definitely dies, and we'll have to live with abandoning an American pilot in enemy hands when we had a chance, one chance, to save him. Riley heard Hendricks exhale slowly. She'd put him in an impossible position, but she'd also given him something commanders desperately needed. A plan, however desperate, that offered hope instead of just writing off the loss. All right, Staff Sergeant, I'm going to pitch this to the assault commander, but you need to understand, if you say you can make these shots, you better damn well make them. The entire operation will be counting on your precision. No pressure, but you'll have 40 lives depending on you not missing. Understood, sir, I won't miss. As the radio went silent, Riley felt the full weight of what she just committed to settle onto her shoulders. She just volunteered to thread a needle through chaos, to make shots that would determine whether men lived or died, whether Captain Mitchell came home or vanished forever. Torres leaned close. Riley, are you sure about this? Those shots you're talking about, pilots in a cockpit at 800 meters, heavy weapons operators in hardened positions, that's really fucking hard. Riley looked at her spotter, her battle buddy, her friend. Danny, when have you ever known me to miss? He thought about that, then slowly nodded. Never. Then trust me now. Riley returned to her scope, beginning to identify her targets, planning her shot sequence. We're going to do something incredible today. We're going to save a man's life against impossible odds. And 20 years from now, when people ask us about this mission, we're going to tell them it was the proudest moment of our lives. Through her scope, Riley watched Captain Mitchell being moved back to his cell. His eyes swept the mountains once more, and she wondered if he could feel her watching, if some instinct told him that help was coming, that an American sniper was 800 meters away, preparing to bet everything on 90 seconds of perfect execution. The complications had mounted, the odds had gotten worse, the margin for error had vanished entirely. But Riley Cross had made a promise, and she intended to keep it. 6 hours until H-hour, time to make the impossible possible. The sun climbed toward its zenith, harsh and unforgiving, as Riley lay motionless in her hide sight. 6 hours had compressed into 6 minutes of final preparation. Her rifle was an extension of her body now, zeroed perfectly, each variable calculated and recalculated. Wind, 6 knots east to west. Temperature, 78 degrees. Humidity, low. Distance to primary targets: 847 meters to the helicopter pad, 823 meters to the guard towers, 891 meters to the heavy weapons position on the north wall. 2 minutes to H-hour, Webb whispered into his radio. All elements report ready. Through her scope, Riley watched the compound explode into coordinated chaos. Just as she'd predicted, they were preparing to move Mitchell. The attack helicopter's rotors were spinning up to full speed. Guards were forming a security corridor from the detention building to the landing pad. Officers were shouting orders, positioning men with military precision. "I count 4 guards on Mitchell," Torres called out, his eye glued to the spotting scope. "Plus 2 officers directing the movement. Helicopter crew is boarding, pilot, co-pilot, 2-door gunners." Riley's crosshairs settled on the pilot's head, visible through the helicopter's open cockpit. She could see him clearly, middle-aged, graying hair, adjusting his flight helmet, a professional doing his job. In 30 seconds she would kill him. The weight of that settled into her bones, not with guilt but with grim necessity. This was war. This was the choice. 1 minute, Webb counted down. The detention building door opened. Captain Mitchell emerged, flanked by 4 heavily armed guards. Riley shifted her aim, tracking him through her scope. His hands were zip-tied in front of him, his face a mask of bruises and dried blood, but he was walking under his own power. That was good. He'd need to move fast when the chaos started. 30 seconds. Riley's breathing slowed, entering that crystalline state of focus where the world contracted to nothing but the reticle, the target, the trigger. Her heart rate dropped to 40 beats per minute. Her finger rested on the trigger with exactly 3 pounds of pressure, halfway to the 5-pound break point. 15 seconds. Assault team is inbound. Through her peripheral vision, Riley could see Torres watching, waiting to call her corrections. Chen had his rifle up, covering their flanks. Webb was managing 3 radio frequencies simultaneously, coordinating the ballet of violence about to unfold. 10 seconds. Mitchell and his guards were halfway to the helicopter, 40 meters of open ground. Riley could see the pilot going through his pre-flight checks, unaware that death was waiting 847 meters away, watching him through a rifle scope. 5, 4, 3. Riley exhaled slowly, her finger tightening. 2, 1, execute, execute, execute. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with a controlled violence. Through the scope, Riley saw the helicopter pilot's head snap back in a red mist. She didn't pause to confirm the kill. Muscle memory was already working the bolt, ejecting the spent brass, chambering a fresh round. Her crosshairs found the co-pilot, who was turning toward his dead commander with confusion. Squeeze. The second pilot fell backward out of his seat. "Left tower gunner," Torres called. Riley pivoted smoothly, finding the guard tower operator who was swinging his PKM machine gun toward the sound of approaching helicopters. Her shot caught him in the chest, and he collapsed forward over his weapon. The tower went silent. Right tower. Another pivot, another smooth trigger pull. The second tower gunner dropped, his machine gun firing wildly into the air as his dead hand spasmed on the trigger. In the compound below, chaos erupted like a kicked anthill. Guards were screaming, spinning in confusion, trying to locate the source of the invisible death that was picking them apart. Some ran for cover. Others opened fire blindly at the mountains. And in the middle of it all, Captain Mitchell understood immediately what was happening. He dropped to the ground, making himself small as his guards panicked around him. "Heavy weapons, north wall." Tor's voice was calm, professional, directing her fire like a conductor with an orchestra. Riley's crosshairs found the technical vehicle, a pickup truck with a mounted .50 caliber machine gun. The operator was traversing the weapon toward the assault helicopters that now screamed over the ridge line. Riley's shot took him in the neck. The gunner behind him tried to take over the weapon. Riley's follow-up shot ended that attempt. "Assault team is 30 seconds out," Webb called. "Keep them suppressed." Riley worked her bolt with mechanical efficiency. Shot, bolt, aim, shot, bolt, aim. Each squeeze of the trigger brought violent death 800 meters away, an officer coordinating the defense, a soldier with an RPG raising the launcher to his shoulder, a machine gunner setting up a defensive position. Each target fell before they could become a threat to the incoming assault team. Then the first Black Hawk roared over the compound at treetop level, and the world exploded into full combat. The assault team fast-roped down into hell, 40 Marines hitting the ground in a choreographed insertion that had been practiced 1,000 times. But the enemy had numbers, defensive positions, and the home field advantage. The firefight that erupted was savage and immediate. "North perimeter breached," Webb relayed. "Assault team is taking heavy fire from the barracks." Riley shifted her aim to the barracks windows, where muzzle flashes sparkled like deadly fireflies. She couldn't see individual targets through the windows, but she could suppress them. Shot after shot through the openings, forcing the enemy to take cover, to stop shooting, to give the assault team precious seconds to advance. Through her scope, Riley tracked Mitchell. He'd rolled behind a concrete barrier, separated from his guards who were caught in the crossfire. One guard went down to friendly fire. Another was cut down by the assault team as they advanced through the compound. The remaining two were dragging Mitchell back toward the detention building, trying to secure their prisoner instead of defending their position. "Package is being moved back to detention," Riley called. "Southeast corner, 2 guards." Her crosshairs found the first guard, Squeeze. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings. The second guard released Mitchell and dove for cover, firing wildly with his AK-47. Riley's follow-up shot missed. The man was moving too fast, too unpredictably. "Target is mobile, adjusting," Riley muttered, tracking the guard through her scope. But then something happened that made Riley's blood freeze. The extraction helicopters, the Black Hawks that were supposed to extract Mitchell and the assault team, suddenly broke off their approach. One of the aircraft was streaming smoke from its tail rotor, spinning in a barely controlled descent toward a clearing half a mile away. "Extraction bird is hit. Extraction bird is hit." Webb's voice carried real fear now. "They're aborting, they're pulling back." Riley kept shooting, but her mind was racing ahead to the catastrophe unfolding below. Without the extraction helicopters, the assault team was stranded deep in hostile territory with an injured pilot and 150 enemy combatants who were rapidly getting organized. On the ground, the assault team leader was screaming orders, trying to reorganize his men, trying to salvage a mission that was disintegrating. They'd breached the perimeter, but they were pinned down in a crossfire. Enemy reinforcements were pouring out of every building, and Captain Mitchell was still exposed in the kill zone, separated from the assault team by 40 meters of open ground that was being swept by machine gun fire. "Command is ordering a full retreat," Webb shouted. "All elements withdraw, abort mission, abort mission." Through her scope, Riley watched the assault team beginning to fall back toward the perimeter breach, laying down covering fire as they withdrew. They were leaving. They were leaving Mitchell behind. "No," Riley whispered. "No, no, no." She shifted her aim, trying to provide covering fire for Mitchell to make a run toward the assault team, but the volume of enemy fire was overwhelming. Every time Mitchell tried to move from behind his concrete barrier, bullets chewed up the ground around him. Then Riley saw it, the thing that would haunt her nightmares if she failed. An enemy officer, seeing the assault team retreating, grabbed Mitchell by the collar. The officer was using the American pilot as a human shield, dragging him backward toward the underground bunker entrance on the compound's east side. Once Mitchell went through that door, into the underground facility, he was gone forever. No rescue, no recovery, just a pilot who had trusted his country to bring him home, abandoned in enemy hands because the mission had failed. Riley's crosshairs tracked them across the compound. 1,200 meters now, the officer and Mitchell had moved to the far side. The wind had shifted, gusting unpredictably. Smoke from burning vehicles obscured her view, and the officer was keeping Mitchell directly in front of him, a human shield, only inches separating their heads. "Cross, we need to pull back," Chen's voice was urgent behind her. "Enemy patrols will be sweeping these mountains in minutes. We need to move now." Riley didn't respond. Her entire world had contracted to that single image through her scope. Captain Jake Mitchell, bloodied and beaten, being dragged toward captivity by an enemy officer who knew exactly what he was doing, who knew that no sniper would risk taking a shot through an American prisoner. "Riley," Torres grabbed her shoulder. "We have to go now." Through her scope, Riley watched Mitchell's eyes sweep the mountains one last time, searching, hopping. The bunker entrance was 3 seconds away, 2 seconds, 1 second. This was the decision that would define everything. Riley exhaled slowly and placed her finger on the trigger. Time fractured into crystalline fragments, each microsecond stretching into eternity as Riley stared through her scope at the impossible choice before her. The enemy officer had Captain Mitchell in a textbook hostage hold, one arm locked around the pilot's throat, using his body as a shield while dragging him backward toward the bunker entrance. Through her 25x magnification, Riley could see every detail with brutal clarity. The officer's head was positioned directly behind Mitchell's, separated by perhaps 3 inches, maybe 4. The kind of gap that existed only in nightmares and last-chance scenarios. "Riley, abort the shot," Tor's voice cracked with urgency beside her. "You can't make that. Nobody can make that shot." 1,200 meters. The distance alone made it nearly impossible. Riley had made 1,000-meter shots before, but those had been against stationary targets in controlled conditions. This was different. This was chaos incarnate. Her mind processed the variables with computer-like precision. Years of training and experience calculating factors that most people couldn't even name. Distance, 1,247 meters, verified by laser rangefinder. Wind, gusting 712 knots from the east, creating unpredictable drift. At this range, a wind gust could push the bullet 6 inches off target. Elevation, 213-foot height advantage, requiring compensation for the downward angle. Temperature, 82 degrees, affecting air density and bullet velocity. Target movement. Both Mitchell and the officer were moving backward at approximately 2 feet per second, creating a dynamic lead calculation. Smoke, a burning vehicle, was creating thermal currents and visual distortion between her position and the target. Margin of error, 3 inches, maybe less. Through her scope, Riley watched the officer's head bob and weave behind Mitchell's as they moved. The bunker entrance was 15 feet away, 10 feet. In 5 seconds, they would disappear underground forever. "Cross, we are pulling back now." Chen's command voice cut through her focus. "That's an order." Riley's finger rested on the trigger, 3 pounds of pressure already applied. 2 more pounds and the rifle would fire. Her breathing had slowed to 4 breaths per minute, her heart rate to 38 beats. She entered that zone that all elite snipers knew, the place where time slowed, where the rifle became part of your body, where you could feel the bullet's path before you even took the shot. But this wasn't a paper target. This wasn't even an enemy combatant standing alone. This was a 3-inch gap between an American pilot's head and his captor's skull, at a distance where the slightest miscalculation meant killing the man she'd come to save. "Riley, please." Tor's hand was on her shoulder now. "You'll kill him. The variables are too unstable. Wind, smoke, movement. There are too many factors." Through the scope, Riley saw Mitchell stumble, his legs giving out from exhaustion and injury. The officer yanked him upright, cursing, readjusting his grip. And in that moment of readjustment, Mitchell did something that changed everything. He turned his head slightly, creating another inch of separation. His eyes swept the distant mountains, and though it was impossible at this range, Riley felt his gaze lock onto her position. For one crystalline instant, their eyes met across 1,247 meters of hostile territory, and Riley understood. Mitchell knew she was there. He was creating the gap. He was trusting her with his life. The officer started moving again, dragging Mitchell the final steps toward the bunker. 5 feet, 4 feet. Riley's mind was a calculator running at impossible speed. Bullet drop at 1,247 meters, approximately 468 inches. Compensated. Wind drift with a 9-knot crosswind, approximately 31 inches. Calculated. Time of flight, approximately 1.7 seconds. Target will move approximately 3.4 feet during bullet flight. Lead adjusted. Probability of hitting the officer, 30%. Probability of hitting Mitchell, 25%. Probability of missing both, 45%. Probability of making the shot if she didn't take it, 0%. Command is calling off the mission. Webb's voice was desperate. All elements are withdrawing. Cross, we need to move. 3 feet to the bunker entrance. Riley's scope settled on the gap, that impossible, microscopic window between two human heads. She could see individual strands of hair on both men. She could see the sweat on the officer's temple. She could see the resignation beginning to form in Mitchell's eyes as he realized rescue wasn't coming. Every instructor Riley had ever trained under would tell her not to take this shot. Every manual, every doctrine, every rule of engagement said the risk was too high. The variables were too unstable. The margin for error was non-existent. But Riley Cross hadn't become one of the Marine Corps elite snipers by following the safe path. She'd made shots that others called impossible. She'd pushed the boundaries of what precision marksmanship could achieve. And right now, an American pilot was 2 seconds away from disappearing forever because she was hesitating. 2 feet to the bunker entrance. "I can make it," Riley whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "You can't," Torres was almost shouting now. "Riley, look at the wind flag, look at the smoke. The thermals alone could push that bullet 4 inches off target." 1 foot to the bunker entrance. Through her scope, Riley saw Mitchell's eyes one final time. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't begging. He was simply looking at her with the calm acceptance of a warrior who understood that sometimes survival came down to trusting someone you'd never met to make a shot that shouldn't be possible. And in that moment, Riley made her choice. She adjusted her aim half a degree left, compensating for the wind gust she felt against her cheek. Her crosshairs settled on a point 3 inches to the right of Mitchell's head, where the officer's temple would be in 1.7 seconds after she accounted for movement and bullet flight time. "No," Chen said flatly, reading her body language. "Staff Sergeant Cross, I am ordering you to stand down. Do not take that shot." But the order came too late. Riley had already committed. Her world contracted to absolute silence. The shouting voices of her team faded away. The distant gunfire became white noise. The chaos of the battlefield dissolved until nothing existed except the rifle, the target, and the impossible mathematics of threading a bullet through a 3-inch gap at 1,247 meters. Riley's breathing stopped mid-exhale. Her finger completed its pressure on the trigger with the gentleness of a lover's touch. She felt the trigger break, that precise moment when the sear released and the firing pin began its journey forward to strike the primer. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder with familiar violence, but Riley was already riding the recoil, keeping her scope on target, watching. The brass casing ejected in slow motion, tumbling through the air, catching the sunlight. The bullet departed the barrel at 2,800 feet per second, beginning its 1.7-second journey through chaos toward the target. Through her scope, Riley tracked the shot's path, watching for the impact, her entire body tense with the knowledge that she just made a decision that would either save a life or end one. Her finger was already on the bolt, ready to work another round into the chamber, but she knew there wouldn't be time for a second shot. This was all or nothing, success or catastrophe. The bullet traveled through the swirling smoke, through the thermal currents rising from burning vehicles, through the gusting wind that pushed it fractionally off course before another gust corrected it back. Mathematics and chaos engaged in a battle of wills, with a man's life hanging in the balance. Torres was frozen beside her, his eye pressed to the spotting scope, too horrified to look away. Webb had stopped breathing entirely. Chen had his hand on Riley's shoulder, either to pull her back or to steady her. She couldn't tell which. And in the compound below, Captain Jake Mitchell felt the bullet pass within 2 inches of his right ear, felt the sonic crack of its passage, felt the pressure wave of supersonic death whisper past his head. Then the enemy officer's skull exploded in a red mist, and Mitchell stumbled forward, alive. For one perfect moment, Riley felt nothing. No triumph, no relief, just the absolute certainty that she had just threaded an impossible needle and changed the course of 2 lives forever. Then Tor's voice shattered the silence. "Target down! Holy shit, target down!" The bunker entrance stood empty, the officer's body crumpled at its threshold, and Captain Jake Mitchell stood in the kill zone, alone and alive, staring at the mountains where an American sniper had just saved his life with a shot that shouldn't have been possible. Riley's hands began to tremble as the adrenaline hit her system. She'd done it. Against every odd, against every calculation that said it couldn't be done, she'd made the shot. But there was no time for celebration. Mitchell was still in the kill zone, and enemy soldiers were recovering from their shock, raising their weapons. "Assault team, packages clear," Riley transmitted, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "I repeat, packages clear. Move in now." The assault team, which had been falling back, suddenly reversed course, surging back into the compound with renewed purpose. They just witnessed something impossible, and it had given them a second chance. Riley kept her scope on Mitchell, ready to protect him, ready to make whatever shots were necessary to bring him home. Her first impossible shot was done. But the battle was far from over. The enemy officer's body hadn't even finished falling when Riley was already working her bolt, chambering a fresh round with mechanical precision. Through her scope, she watched Captain Mitchell stand motionless for half a heartbeat, shock, disbelief, and survival instinct warring across his bruised face. Then his military training kicked in, and he dove toward the nearest cover, a concrete barrier 20 feet away. "Assault team is reversing course," Webb shouted, his voice electric with renewed hope. "They're going back in." Riley's crosshairs tracked across the compound, hunting for threats. Enemy soldiers were recovering from the shock of watching their officer's head explode from an invisible sniper. Some were taking cover. Others were raising weapons toward Mitchell's exposed position. Riley made them regret it. Her first shot dropped a soldier who was drawing a bead on Mitchell from a second-story window. The man tumbled backward out of sight. Her second shot hit a guard who was running toward Mitchell's position. The bullet caught him mid-stride and he went down hard. Third shot. Another window shooter eliminated before he could fire. Riley was a machine, each movement flowing into the next with brutal efficiency. "Target left near the vehicle," Torres called, his spotter scope locked on threats. "He's got an RPG." Riley pivoted, found the soldier raising the rocket-propelled grenade launcher toward the approaching assault helicopters. The shot was difficult, partial cover, moving target, smoke obscuring her view. She led him by 2 feet, compensating for his movement, and squeezed. The soldier spun and fell, the RPG clattering unfired to the ground. "Assault team is 30 seconds out," Webb reported. "They need suppression on the north barracks." Riley shifted her aim to the barracks building where muzzle flashes sparkled from multiple windows. She couldn't see individual targets, but she could make them keep their heads down. She fired into the windows systematically, left to right, each shot punching through the openings. The enemy fire from that position slackened as soldiers dove for cover, unsure where the death was coming from. Through her scope, Riley watched the Black Hawk helicopter scream over the compound wall at dangerous speed. The assault team leader was visible in the door, laying down covering fire with his M4 carbine. The bird flared hard, hovering 10 feet above the ground near Mitchell's position. Riley held her fire. The helicopter was in her line of sight now, blocking her view of half the compound. Come on, she muttered, watching Mitchell sprint toward the hovering aircraft. His hands were still zip-tied, his movements awkward and painful, but he was moving fast for a man who'd been beaten for 3 days. A soldier appeared from behind a wall, AK-47 raised toward Mitchell's back. Riley's shot caught him in the chest before he could pull the trigger. Another enemy fighter emerged from a doorway. Riley's follow-up shot ended that threat too. But the enemy was adapting now, understanding there was a sniper in the mountains. Soldiers were using smoke grenades, creating a haze that disrupted Riley's sight lines. Others were staying in hard cover, only exposing themselves for seconds at a time. Technical vehicle moving toward the helicopter, Torres called out urgently. Riley found it, a pickup truck with a mounted machine gun, racing around the corner of a building, the gunner traversing his weapon toward the exposed Black Hawk. This was the nightmare scenario. A .50 caliber machine gun could tear the helicopter apart in seconds. Riley led the moving vehicle, calculated the speed and angle, and fired. The windshield exploded. The driver slumped forward and the technical careened wildly, crashing into a wall. But the gunner was still alive, still manning his weapon. Riley worked her bolt, chambered another round, and fired again. The gunner jerked backward and the machine gun went silent. "Packages aboard," Webb's voice was triumphant. "Assault team is extracting." Through the gaps in the smoke, Riley watched the Black Hawk lift off, Mitchell visible in the cargo bay being pulled inboard by 2 Marines. But they weren't clear yet. The helicopter was picking up speed, banking hard to get over the compound wall when Riley saw the danger. Another soldier, this one with an RPG, had climbed onto a roof and was tracking the helicopter's flight path. Riley didn't have time for calculations or careful aim. Instinct took over. She led the target by feel, by experience, by the thousands of hours she'd spent behind this rifle. Her shot took him in the shoulder just as he fired. The RPG went wild, corkscrewing into the sky harmlessly as the soldier tumbled off the roof. The Black Hawk cleared the wall and accelerated away, disappearing over the ridge line with its precious cargo. "They're clear," Webb was almost laughing. "They're clear, packages extracted." Riley allowed herself one breath of relief before her tactical mind reasserted control. "We need to move. Now. Enemy will be sweeping these mountains in minutes." She was right. Through her scope, she could already see enemy soldiers organizing, pointing toward her position, preparing to hunt for the sniper who just humiliated them. Chen was already breaking down their equipment, Webb was packing the radio gear, and Torres was collecting their brass casings. Never leave evidence behind. Riley took one last look through her scope at the compound. Smoke was rising from multiple fires. Bodies lay where they'd fallen. The bunker entrance where Mitchell had nearly disappeared stood empty, the dead officer's blood pooling on the concrete. In 90 seconds of precision violence, Riley had changed the outcome of an impossible mission. "Cross, this is command." Hendrick's voice came through with barely controlled emotion. "I don't know what the hell you just did, but that was the most incredible shooting I've ever witnessed. We have multiple observers confirming your shots. That last shot, 1,200 meters through chaos." He paused, and Riley could hear the awe in his voice. "Outstanding work, Marine. Now get the hell out of there before they find you." "Copy that, sir. Overwatch 1 is displacing." Riley rolled away from her position, her body protesting after 18 hours of remaining motionless. She pulled her ghillie suit tight and began moving down the ridge with her team, using terrain and vegetation to mask their withdrawal. Behind them, they could hear enemy patrols beginning to sweep the mountains, but Chen had planned 3 alternate exfiltration routes. They would use the secondary path, moving fast and quiet through terrain they'd memorized during insertion. 2 hours later, exhausted and running on pure adrenaline, Riley's team reached the extraction point, a clearing 3 miles from the compound. The distinctive thump of helicopter rotors grew louder, and a Black Hawk descended through the trees, its door gunners scanning for threats. As Riley climbed aboard, the crew chief grabbed her shoulder and had to shout over the rotor noise, "You're the sniper, the one who made those shots." When Riley nodded, he shook his head in disbelief. "Ma'am, I've been flying combat missions for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just did. Captain Mitchell is asking for you. He's in the medevac bird that just took off, but he made us promise to tell you. He saw you. Out there in the kill zone, he saw you in those mountains, and he knew you wouldn't miss." Riley felt something crack in her chest, not breaking, but opening. The weight of that impossible shot, the weight of holding a man's life in her hands at 1,247 meters, the weight of making the choice when everyone said it was impossible, it all shifted from burden to purpose. She'd threaded the needle. She'd made the shot that couldn't be made. She'd trusted her training, her instinct, and her skill when the margin for error was measured in inches. And because of that trust, Captain Jake Mitchell was alive. As the helicopter banked away from hostile territory, Riley closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel it fully. The pride, the relief, the profound responsibility of what she'd just accomplished. She'd saved a life today. Against impossible odds, through chaos and violence, she'd brought an American pilot home. Torres sat beside her, still shaking his head. "I still can't believe you made that shot. I watched it through the spotter scope and I still don't believe it." Riley opened her eyes and looked at her spotter, her friend, the man who'd called her corrections through 100 missions. "Danny, you know what the difference is between impossible and possible." "What's that?" "Impossible is just a longer shot." Riley smiled despite her exhaustion, "and I've never been afraid of the long shots." Chen, sitting across from them, raised his canteen in a toast. "To Staff Sergeant Riley Cross, who just made the shot that'll be talked about in sniper schools for the next 50 years. Webb joined the toast, to bringing our people home." Riley raised her own canteen, feeling the bond between these warriors who just accomplished something extraordinary together. "To second chances," she said quietly, "and to never leaving anyone behind." The helicopter carried them toward safety, toward debriefing, toward the inevitable questions about how she'd made a shot that the math said shouldn't work. But Riley wasn't thinking about any of that. She was thinking about Captain Mitchell, about the moment their eyes had met across 1,247 meters of hostile ground, about the trust that had passed between 2 warriors who'd never spoken a word. She'd made the impossible choice. She'd taken the shot when everyone said it couldn't be done. And she'd brought him home. The mission wasn't over yet. There was still the extraction flight, the debriefing, the long road home. But the hardest part was done. The shot that would define Riley Cross's entire military career was behind her. And she hadn't missed. 36 hours after the mission, Riley Cross stood at attention on the rain-swept tarmac of Ramstein Air Base in Germany. The flight from the forward operating base had been a blur of debriefing, paperwork, and mandatory psychological evaluation. Command wanted to understand how she'd made a shot that violated every probability calculation. Riley had tried to explain wind compensation, bullet drop, lead calculations, but the truth was simpler and more complex than math. Sometimes you just knew. Sometimes trust was stronger than statistics. The C-17 Globemaster transport touched down with a screech of tires, its massive bulk cutting through the German drizzle. Riley's dress uniform was already soaked, but she didn't move. She'd been waiting for this moment since she'd watched that Black Hawk disappear over the ridge with Mitchell aboard. The cargo ramp lowered with hydraulic precision, and medical personnel moved forward with gurneys and equipment. Captain Jake Mitchell emerged walking on his own power, one arm in a sling, his face a canvas of purple and yellow bruises. He was wearing a hospital gown under a military jacket someone had draped over his shoulders. He looked thin, exhausted, and alive. So beautifully, impossibly alive. His eyes scanned the tarmac, searching. When they found Riley standing at attention 20 yards away, he stopped the medics with a raised hand. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, two warriors bound by a moment that had lasted 1.7 seconds and would last forever. Mitchell walked toward her, ignoring the protests of the medical team. Each step was careful, painful, but determined. Riley remained at attention until he stood directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the stitches holding together a cut above his eyebrow, close enough to see the haunted shadows in his eyes that spoke of 3 days in hell. "Staff Sergeant Riley Cross," Mitchell said quietly, his voice rough from disuse and trauma. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." "Sir," Riley replied, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "Welcome home, Captain." Mitchell's jaw worked as he struggled with words that seemed inadequate. "They told me about the shot, 1,247 meters, 3-inch gap, moving target, wind, smoke, chaos." He shook his head slowly. "I was there. I felt that bullet pass my head. I heard it. I felt the officer's blood hit my back when you're shot. When you—" He couldn't finish. "You gave me the gap, sir," Riley said. "When you turned your head, when you created that space, you trusted me." "I saw you." Mitchell's eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made Riley's breath catch. "Out there in that kill zone, I looked at the mountains and I saw a glint, sunlight off your scope, maybe I just imagined it. But I knew someone was watching, someone was trying. So when that officer dragged me toward that bunker, I turned my head and I prayed that whoever was behind that scope was good enough to thread that needle." Riley felt tears threatening but held them back. "Sir, No," Mitchell raised his good hand. "Let me finish. They told me your team leader ordered you to stand down. They told me the shot was mathematically impossible, that every variable said you'd miss or hit me. They told me you took it anyway." His voice cracked. "You bet my life on your skill, Staff Sergeant. You made a choice that could have killed me and instead you saved me. I need you to understand what that means." The rain fell harder now, and someone was approaching with an umbrella, but neither Riley nor Mitchell acknowledged them. They existed in a bubble of shared understanding that transcended rank, protocol, and the normal boundaries between strangers. "I was ready to die in that compound," Mitchell continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I'd held out as long as I could. I'd given them false information, delayed, resisted. But I was breaking. Another day, maybe 2, and they'd have gotten the codes. They'd have compromised our entire communications network. Thousands of American lives would have been at risk because I wasn't strong enough to hold out forever." "You held out long enough, sir," Riley said firmly. "You gave us the window we needed." Mitchell smiled, and despite the bruises and exhaustion, it transformed his face. "We saved each other, Staff Sergeant. I gave you the gap, you made the shot. That's what warriors do. We trust each other with our lives even when it seems impossible." A medical officer approached cautiously. "Captain Mitchell, sir, we really need to get you to the hospital. You're running a fever, and we need to treat your injuries properly." Mitchell nodded but didn't break eye contact with Riley. "One more thing," he said. He reached into the pocket of the jacket draped over his shoulders and pulled out something small. It was a spent brass casing, the casing from Riley's impossible shot, collected from the compound by the assault team. Someone had engraved it with coordinates: 38, 2483 degrees N, 44, 6171 degrees E, 1247 M, the shot that brought him home. "They gave this to me," Mitchell said, pressing it into Riley's hand. "But I think you should have it, not as a trophy but as a reminder that impossible is just another word for harder than usual." A reminder that when we trust each other, when we believe in each other, we can accomplish things that the math says can't be done. Riley closed her fingers around the brass casing, feeling its weight, feeling the permanence of what they'd shared. "Thank you, sir, for trusting me, for giving me the chance to bring you home." "Thank you for not missing," Mitchell replied with a slight smile. Then he came to attention, awkward with his injuries but perfect in its intent, and rendered Riley a crisp salute. Riley returned the salute, and in that moment, rank and protocol became something more. A recognition of mutual respect between two warriors who'd stared death in the face and refused to blink. As the medics finally escorted Mitchell toward the waiting ambulance, he looked back once. "Hey, Staff Sergeant. Sorry. If I ever get shot down again, I want you in those mountains with that rifle." Riley smiled through the rain. "Sir, respectfully, let's try to avoid you getting shot down again." Mitchell laughed, a real laugh that seemed to surprise him with its normalcy. "Deal." Riley watched the ambulance drive away, its lights flashing in the German twilight. She stood in the rain for a long time after, turning the brass casing over in her hands, feeling the weight of what had happened settle into something she could carry. Tours found her there 20 minutes later. "Command wants a full debrief. They're talking about medals, commendations. The video footage from the assault team's helmet cameras is already becoming legendary. They're saying it's the greatest sniper shot in modern military history." Riley pocketed the brass casing and turned to face her spotter. "It wasn't about being the greatest shot, Danny. It was about bringing him home." "You did that," Torres said quietly. "Against impossible odds, you did that." 3 months later, Riley stood in a ceremony room at Camp Lejeune as a general pinned the Navy Cross on her uniform, the second highest military decoration for valor. Captain Jake Mitchell, fully recovered and returned to flight status, stood in the front row in his dress blues, applauding with everyone else. After the ceremony, as photographers captured images and senior officers congratulated her, Mitchell approached. They'd exchanged emails over the months, brief messages that somehow conveyed more than long conversations could. They'd shared something that couldn't be explained to people who hadn't been there, who hadn't felt that moment of absolute trust across 1,247 meters of chaos. "You know what the craziest part is?" Mitchell said as they stood together, away from the crowd. "What's that, sir?" "I fly million-dollar aircraft at supersonic speeds. I've made carrier landings at night in storms. I've dropped ordnance in combat and faced enemy fire." He shook his head. "But the bravest thing I've ever done was turn my head 3 inches to the left and trust a Marine I'd never met to make a shot that shouldn't be possible." Riley met his eyes. "And the bravest thing I've ever done was pull that trigger knowing I might kill the man I was trying to save." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two people bound by a decision made in 1.7 seconds that had defined both their lives. "I'm being deployed again in 3 weeks, Mitchell said. "Different theater, different mission, but I fly easier now knowing there are people like you out there, people who won't quit, people who make the impossible shot when it matters most." "Fly safe, Captain," Riley said, "and try not to get shot down." Mitchell smiled. "If I do, I know who to call." As Riley drove away from the ceremony that evening, the Navy Cross in its case on the seat beside her, she thought about impossibility and choice, about trust and skill, about the weight of holding another person's life in your hands at the moment when hesitation meant death and action meant risk. She'd made the shot, against every calculation, against every probability, against every voice that said it couldn't be done. She'd threaded that needle because sometimes mathematics and courage intersect at a point called necessity. Captain Jake Mitchell was home. He was alive. He was flying again. And somewhere in the mountains of a hostile land, the wind still blew through a ridge where a Marine sniper had once made the impossible possible, where trust and skill had converged into one perfect moment, where a decision made in 1.7 seconds had echoed into eternity. Riley Cross had brought him home, and in doing so, she'd proven what warriors have always known, that impossible is just another word for not yet accomplished. The shot had been made, the pilot had been saved, the trust had been honored. And that was enough. The end.
Bello. Che bello, c'era il pezzettino bianco. Stavo già pensando che avrei perso i portali, quindi dovevo metterlo di fretta. Vedi, questa è la cosa che dicevo l'altro giorno. Mi piace quando riesco a trovare un gioco che ti fa dei quiz, degli enigmi, in cui il modo in cui farlo, quando lo fai, è quello chiaramente giusto. Perché stavo già pensando, passo tra la membrana, mi si cancellano i portali, metto velocissimo un portale in modo che mi salvi. E invece no, bastava mettere il portale accanto e non si bruciavano i portali. C'era comunque modo di farlo, però era più brutto l'altro. Si capisce che questo era quello giusto,
Brainwave,
bello.
I'm gonna tape you solving these